basic outline of what to think about with regards to crisis management. Part of this has to do with thinking about the components and the players so that you can either author your own, update your own, have conversations with those of you that rent facilities on what kind of conversations you should have so that you could be a good steward of your program when using someone else's site. And then second, there's a big component that has to do with media and connection with the media because that was also something that came up in the pre-conference information. So that's kind of where I'm going, but please ask questions, you know, clarifying or exploratory questions. You can also go in the chat box. I think I can see that chat box and most of you can't, so if there's things that come up there, I'll try to keep my eye on that. And we can go from there. So if somebody could just type in like a howdy hi in the chat box just to make sure I'm getting that, that would be great for me. Oh, great. Thanks, Mary Ellen. That's awesome. That's super. And howdy from Delaware. Hello. Okay. So why don't we just kind of get off and going, and hopefully you're all hearing me a-okay. Hi, Marcy. Anyway, I'm going to have more fun doing that than actually doing the presentation. I apologize. So, so here we can kind of get started here as I take a look at navigating the PowerPoint. So this first slide actually is just probably a little bit of an overshare. This was a book that my parents bought me when I was in junior high school about all the worst case scenarios in survival handbook, and I read this thing until it was dog-eared, and I learned how to react if I had to wrestle an alligator, or if somebody was giving birth, or if I need to escape from quicksand. And the reason I share that is that as a young person, I don't know why, I was drawn to what to do in case of emergencies. That fascinated me. I probably should have been a paramedic or emergency responder, but instead I got into this wonderful field of providing camp experiences. But once again, my tendency from being a young person kind of stayed with me. And there are those times when in my career I've sat down and said, well, gosh, what if this happened? How would I respond? And how should our population respond, our community, in case that there was some kind of incident? And I will share that an incident, a lot of people talk about accidents or emergencies, but incidents is really when anything happens. It could be something that happens medically with a camper that needs to be seen outside of the scope of what happens in our camp. It can be if somebody walks into camp that we don't know who they are. It could be a fire within or outside of camp. Or it could be a 7.8 earthquake on your second to last night in camp, which I experienced as well, which shut down most of Southern California highways and abilities to operate for about a month. And I had 120 campers in camp. So from that kind of experience, thank goodness I used to think about these things. And a lot of it is I've sought different experts to kind of help me put together documents and a mindset for our program. For the point that if I'm not there in camp, what will we do and how will we know what to do? And how can we anticipate everything that might happen? So that's kind of just to kind of let you know kind of the where I'm coming from with regard to this presentation. As I said, really the outcomes of this is really to kind of identify what some of those key elements of a crisis response plan, whether or not if you rent your own facility. I've had the pleasure of doing both. I used to do as I called Camp by U-Haul, which was taking all of our program medical supplies, going to other camps, and then our organization actually purchased a 60-acre, very old facility in 1994, and we operate and manage that not only for our own facilities, but for also partner organizations. So I'll try to kind of address both of those because I think that most of you that, or many of you probably could be put in one of those two buckets with regards to how you relate to your program. The other part that I found that is really important is really what I call the external relationships that are really vital when you're in the midst of a crisis situation. And by thinking about those ahead of time and creating those, creating a relationship, not making those introductions in the midst of crisis, I have found to be very, very helpful. And then the last part, which once again asked you, is managing the public media in emergency situations. And we had quite an experience this last summer, and I'll kind of go over some of those key points there. So unless there's any questions with that, I will just move forward. Cool. Well, the first part that I really want to talk about in any kind of crisis management plan is to identify what those potential camp emergencies might be. And we can think about natural emergencies. Here in California, earthquakes are really big. Wildfires are very big. You know, but there can be, where you are, it might be an excessive amount of rain, or if you have snow, you know, excessive amounts of winter that hits in the middle of a program. Tornadoes, all those kind of things can be natural. It can also be wildlife. What kind of wildlife you might come into contact with. I know many camps, whether or not if that's bears coming through camp, you know, if you have a bear coming through camp, that can be pretty emergent. You have to kind of deal with that. And then there's the human parts of those, and that can be people that come into camp. I know that with the big shooting that just happened in a Santa Barbara area here in California, a shooting at the little community right outside of a college campus, where an individual just wanted to have some kind of notoriety or some kind of getting back at people, and losing of life, and also threatening, you know, hundreds. We can't ignore that that might happen on some of our during some of our programs. It could also be threats that have to do with personnel that you have that maybe don't fit along real well, and also with regards to you know, what happens outside of camp but can impact at camp. Parents coming into camp wanting to pick up their kids, or we've even had situations where, believe it or not, there's some married couples that don't get along real well, and therefore they use their children as pawns, and they take advantage of what happens at camp. So really the first part of any plan is to identify what all of these might be possible for you. This is hard for me to do in kind of a presentation, but really that identification of risk factors is really important. The best way that I've found is to get your best minds together. It can be board people, it can be your camp administrative staff. If you use a camp facility, find out what kinds of issues that they identify. Up here at our camp, having rattlesnakes is a big issue. They can come into camp, or you can come across them in camp. And so what you can do to kind of minimize those kinds of issues. I'm going to take a pause here and just kind of answer to Sharon. And yes, I believe that this presentation is available for printing. I think that Don put it on the COCA Google Share site, as well as I know that our camps, not that it's any kind of gold standard, but it works for us with regards to our emergency plan as well, and we actually keep our medical emergency plan separate, and I think both of those are up. I also do want to acknowledge Skip from Indian Summer. Skip actually came up with a great document of an emergency management and incident action plan that really kind of can illustrate a lot of the how to identify certain risks and some samples of how to respond as well. And so as I go through this, if any of you have those resources to share, and Skip, if you have anything to share, definitely kind of jump in, because I'm not an expert. I'm just one of you that have gathered some information and have this quirky passion for a crisis. So, so to answer that question. So once again, identifying responses, identifying crisis. You know, if you have a child that's going to go into sepsis, if you have a child that needs to be supported outside of what your medical staff can supply, you know, what do you do in those situations? Can be something that having those procedures ahead of time is really important. The other part to take a look at is really identifying your resources. And I kind of put this into three categories. One is, who is your on-site resources? If you're renting a site, you might have site and facility people or those that operate your facility that you rent that either have experience or have a similar plan that you ought to spend some time with. It might also be, and I know for us, our whole administrative team, we use primarily volunteers, but those people who you need to work with and are a part of your Army to respond to a crisis or to respond to an emergency are really important to identify what skill sets they have. There's also off-site. And off-site resources, I take a look at fiduciary as well as support. And by fiduciary, I mean there might be those in your organizations. I have an executive director. I have a CEO of my corporation. I have a board chair. On my board, I have risk management professionals that are in the insurance industry as well as legal. So they can all be helpful resources to review plans, to help you develop plans, as well as respond. The other is those what I call support services offsite. These can be, I know that we have an office at camp, but we also have one in downtown Los Angeles that has a great group of people that if there is a crisis or emergency at the camp facility, that aren't burdened by managing the day-to-day, but can be there to help make calls to parents, that can be extra arms and hands to manage. But once again, to identify those and train those folks is important. And so your plan ought to take a look at identifying those and where they should be either trained or when they need to be employed or used. And so that you can use those people effectively. The third I take a look is community response. These are people that are in our local community. For me, that goes with our healthcare partners. We support 60 different healthcare facilities and clinics, but we also have some primary larger facilities, but all of those people can be help and support in taking a look at crisis. Your doctors, your nurses, they have, they have response teams there that have been really, really helpful, that if there's something that happens at their facilities that can be generalized to what you should do perhaps at camp if something happens. Last but not least are those in the local community. I know that us owning a site, it has been valuable for me to be able to have a face-to-face connection with resources before emergency happens. That's everything from our local fire, forestry, our law enforcement, disaster preparedness folks that are in this community, as well as healthcare folks that are in the community, and also with regards to the hospitals that are local. But to have conversations with them ahead of time, to review plans, to get their input, I find they buy in and they become a supporter. Now, I'm realizing this is a lot of work, but really in some ways it isn't. If you come with a plan and you just make those, introductions and just say, hey, I need your help. People love to be experts, and they love to share their knowledge and to benefit, especially our kids in our programs. And I will tell you, it has been very helpful for me to know names on a first name basis and have relationships with authorities when their minions, whether or not if that's sheriff or fire or forestry, or for us, we have 3 different fire entities that serve our area, that I can use those names and develop a rapport real quickly with whoever the battalion person is right away. So taking the time to get their input but also to engage them is very, very helpful. A matter of fact, last week, the battalion chief that's of the local county fire comes up once a month with all of his new staff just to tour our campsite to find out what resources are here to train his people. And he actually pulls out our emergency response plan. And we have a pond that can provide fire suppression. We have medical staff here. And so he actually trains them in how we can be a resource to the community, but also how they need to respond if there's a fire here, because fire is probably one of our highest issues. So just one of those things to think about. To kind of help as a ticker list, I made a couple of slides that just to kind of say, Here's some of the people to think about that are your on-site people that can be a part of a plan, planning, as well as what we call an emergency response team, or other people call an incident action committee that's actually on-site that can help make those happen. So who are those people? All the way from those that are on maintenance in the kitchen to your doctors and nurses to your program people, and how they can be helpful. Identifying those, once again, those off-site, think about, once again, just kind of an idea of who those people are and where they can be helpful and where you can call upon them. We actually have an off-site committee that if there's something that happens at camp, they're mobilized, and that includes board people, staff people, as well as volunteers that aren't at camp, as well as even people out of state that can help us out. And the, for instance, with that is, we actually had, as I talked about, the earthquake in California that shut down camp and shut down the freeways. We had 120 campers in site. We found very quickly that the phones get overjammed, and trying to call parents or even our office was very difficult. We learned very quickly that we could call out of state quicker than we can call into state. And so part of our plan employs a staff member who is very skilled and very knowledgeable and very trustworthy, who lives actually in now Michigan, and he has access to all of our camper data and all of our how to get a hold of parents and what our emergency response plan is. And so if we need to call upon him, he could call from out of state to parents to let them know, to healthcare facilities, to our board folks. He could actually call in easier from out of state than we could in state. And so that's a part of our plan. So it's just one of those things to kind of think about. The other people that I would really employ, and we're very, or help you with this, is your loss prevention, your insurance folks. Most large insurance companies that help out with camps, be it Markel, Church Mutual, those kind of things, have great what I would call risk management folks. That's what their job is. It's a part of you paying premiums, is for them to go over these plans or to help you develop them. They can also come out, they've come out to site with us, they've walked through site, they've walked through, they've done training with our personnel. So you can use them as well, and they see it from that loss prevention and protection point of view. But it's also great to have them, so if something does happen, you can call them right away because they have teams that can mobilize. Last but not least on this kind of identifying resources is I'll put in is your public relations. And I don't know where all of you sit with that because we have McDonald's in our name. It's part of our standing thing to have public relations people involved with that, because not only are we protecting our campers and our financial resources, but also the reputation of the camp, but we also have the reputation of that corporation. But they've been very helpful in kind of putting together media plans and communication plans. So one of those things to think about. Once again, just another kind of list that you can use as a resource to take a look at what are those community resources that perhaps you ought to have contact with, and I suggest beforehand. Fire authorities, law, there's federal agencies, county, state. Red Cross can be very helpful. They, once again, have teams to take a look at emergencies. Psychosocial support folks, lots of times in hospitals, if there's an incident at camp where there's a death of a camper or there's a significant injury. We've even had traumatic death of staff or campers when they haven't been at camp. People at camp know them very well, and it impacts the community. That can be a crisis at that time, and how do you support that? And media. California and Los Angeles is the media mecca, I think, maybe second to New York. But we find that having relationships in media helps. I can tell you right now, I have the cards, and I can call a lot of the people that I see on local TV now because they know we've even invited them to events. We send them T-shirts, but I know that they'll pick up my call if I need to actually share with what's happening at camp compared to what they're going. As a matter of fact, there's a gentleman with a local TV station, and during this last fire, he was emailing me what the Associated Press was putting out about the fire probably 10 to 15 minutes before it became public. So I could, and he would just email me, and I was on a feed, and he was just letting me know what's going on in the area, what the public was seeing compared to what was really here. And that was invaluable for us to put together our messages. So one of those things just to kind of think about. Questions at this point? I'll keep hopping along. Oh, somebody's unmuted. Or am I unmuted? Hello?
Hello.
Yes, hi. Did you have a question?
No, I was just responding to your hello.
Oh, excellent. Thank you for that. I appreciate that.
This is Dave. Whenever you ask, does anybody have a question, I'm going to unmute everybody because otherwise I'm muted.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah.
Oh, Dave's the keeper of the volume. Excellent. Thank you, Dave.
Mute master. Okay, going to mute everybody in.
All right, well, I'll pop back on unless there's any. The next part that I went through is really defining roles and responsibilities with regards to any kind of a crisis response or emergency response plan. Some of the things to kind of think about is with regards to any kind of emergency is who's going to do evaluations of facilities. If it's an earthquake, if it's a tremendous snow, if it is a fire, if it is anything, we just had 75-mile-an-hour winds in camp. And who evaluates to see whether or not a building's program areas are still suitable and safe? And this might be for those of you that rent camps, you have to find out who that is on the site, who have they identified, who gives the all clear or not. Campus security, who takes care of that? If you're on a camp, if you're renting a camp, do they keep a lookout for people that are entering camp, or is that your responsibility? If it's your facility, once again, who takes a look at who comes into site and who do they talk to? Do they have to check in? Do they get escorted certain places, or are people just able to roam? I know for some camp facilities it might be tough because if you're in wilderness areas, you might just have people enjoying the outdoors coming through camp. But how do you know, and what's your response? And who's actually the point people for that, so that you can still concentrate on delivering program without creating, as I think Skip put it in his, every emergency or every crisis is an incident, but every incident is not necessarily an emergency, but you need to know how to respond to every incident if something like that happens. Who's going to account for everybody, for the population in camp? Who's going to manage those folks? Because if there's an emergency, and I know that when we had the fire, there was a lot of us that were getting in touch with parents, we were communicating with media, we were dealing with our in-city office. There was a lot of things that we had to do, plus we had to monitor the situation. Who's taking care of the kids? And so there needs to be some training with regards to staff of, we have a plan in place, here's what's going on, but this is what we're asking you to do and why. Because it can be very unnerving for staff if they just think that they're being, oh, just go play with kids, but yes, by the way, there's this big crisis going on, because people want to help. But sometimes they need to know the best way to help is to manage the population, to keep that normal. One little side conversation just to share with you is when we had the fire at camp and we decided to evacuate and actually to pull everybody out of camp 3 days early. We were not forced to evacuate. It was a chosen evacuation. We decided to get everything in place and actually make that happen after dinner. So we had everybody at dinner. We finished dinner. We told the whole population at once what was happening besides our core group of staff who was managing the situation, and letting them know that we were ending camp early. People need to go pack up. Buses were literally waiting outside the gate and down the road, so it didn't excite people, but we could pull those in, and we let them know what happened. And one of our campers very very innocently raised his hands and says, I have a question. He says, does that mean we're not going to have the dance tomorrow night? And that let me know that they were being well taken care of. They were taking care of their needs of the camp experience rather than being someone who was trying to manage a crisis. And so, of course, we answered them, no,
Brian,
you can come back for a
Brian,
dance.
I think
But it just lets
Skip
you
might
know
still
that
have a
you need
good
people
one.
to take care of these kids.
Hey, Brian, I think Skip still has
The
a
other
good
issue
one.
the other piece that I want to let you know is about medical needs and first aid. How does your med staff work with that? Who's going to work with the authorities, external resources, public relations, and external communications? So these are roles that need to be defined so that people can go into action and you can do training ahead of time. Any thoughts on that? To kind of go on to the next, it really talks about a crisis response plan. When there is a crisis, call for that emergency. And who do you call? We here at camp, we have something that's called a camp emergency response team. That's the top leadership. That's both on site and down in the city. That is consulted with any kind of crisis or incident that could be considered an emergency. And it's actually kind of management a little bit by committee to determine what the next steps are, but there's definitely a leadership position. But how do you do that compared to getting everybody involved? And when do you need to get everybody involved? When do you need to assemble everybody? Or, as we're so keenly aware of right now, shelter in place. Shelter in place, for those that, if you haven't been exposed, actually is a term that developed out of the Cold War and the nuclear era, where what should you do if a nuclear bomb comes out? Now we hear it more with regards to if there's an active shooter, if there is a risk in the area, how do you ask people to hunker down where they are, because you don't want to get everybody maybe into one central place where they could be vulnerable. And so how do and when do you do that? Do staff know what to do? How do you know when it's all clear and then to resume activity, and also to deal with the feelings and thoughts after that? If any of you take out trips, we take backpacks and wheelchair backpacks outside of our site. How do we include them? What's that communication piece? And then also, how do you practice? How do you practice with staff so they know their roles, with your emergency response team in the city? And then also, how do you do drills in camp? I know in the state of California, it's a law that we have to have what they call an emergency assembly drill within 48 hours whenever we have a camp session. We actually not only do that, we also do, if there's thunder and lightning storms, we have that at camp. And so we let campers know what to do. And also, if there's an intruder in camp, what they should do. We kind of come from the feeling that information is comfort, and knowledge is comfort, that they know that there's a plan in place and they can be a part of the solution, and that we have their care as our utmost concern. So just to think about, what do you do in case of a call of emergency? The next is that crisis response plan. How do you assess who's going to assess a crisis? For us, it was the fire. When was it to the point where we should evacuate? When wasn't it? When was it actually danger? What kind of damage? If you have damage, an earthquake, we had damage to buildings. Also with regards to injury, who's going to assess that, and who are those teams to respond? And once again, for those of you that rent sites, how do you know what resources do you have in that group to say, hey, how do you assess whether or not if a building is going to be okay or not? This is where we're going to need your help if there's injury to one of our campers. And also if there's, weather, if there is nature that's a danger, then, how are we going to handle that? And assess to what level it needs to be. So these are all points to talk about ahead of time. And who's going to take points on certain parts of that. Our facility guys take care of facilities. Our healthcare staff takes care of injuries. The damage assessment, once again, can come to our facility folks, as well as to some of our loss prevention people who respond in 24 hours if we have any damage to facilities. So just to kind of think about what those are. The other one's communication. And this is where it's really important with regards to understand communication on-site, within site, and off-site. How do you do that? Who needs to be a part of communication? And you know, lots of times we have walkie-talkies on site, but then of course not everybody has one, or you know, how do we then get information out to everybody else? How does information come into the site, and who gets to do that? When we called, you know, 135 families with regards to our campers, you know, not only do we have to call them, but we also had to have somebody on a phone line that could pick up phones, because with social media, they found out about we were going to be leaving sometimes before we could call them. And we didn't want them just getting a busy signal, but that there was somebody that could be there to answer phones. Or do you decide to take that to a central office? With voice over internet protocol, you can direct phone lines, phone conversations, and a lot. There's a lot of things with regards to texting and emailing, mass email, mass text to parents. Camps many times can employ that in case of emergency. We made choices to give calls. There's what I call the Camp Emergency Response Team. Who are they? How do they communicate? Where do they communicate? To off-site support people in the city. Community resources, who are that going to be? For fire, for law enforcement, for emergency response people. You know, who's going to be working with that, and how does that communication go? Camper volunteers and families. Sometimes having someone else off-site dealing with that might be the better way to go, so you can manage things up on site. It just really makes the decision. And then, of course, the good old media, who will hound you down if it becomes public, and I can talk about that in a few minutes. So once again, just some areas to kind of consider with regards to developing a plan. This is actually off of a newspaper article that came out in Southern California while we still had campers in camp. We had, like I said, a 27,000-acre fire that really went in 24 hours, from being a small little localized fire at someone's home to being a wildfire. And this was the headline: hundreds evacuate from children's cancer camp in the path of a raging fire in Southern California. And then they had this great picture. I don't even know who this lady is. She looks like, and it seems like she's supposed to be a part of camp. By the way, we had not evacuated at this point. And so it was just really interesting to get this information, and then how do we respond? And this became national news. So we did actually end up evacuating right after this. But having conversations with different people in the news was kind of interesting, because I don't know where they picked up that we had evacuated before we made a decision to evacuate. So media. Media is one of those things that can be pretty squirrely. I respect what media folks do, but I've also learned that media folks are there for our information, and more, they're being called to our entertainment. They are very much pushed to have a story, because they're competing with the housewives of whatever cities there, with regards to the Kardashians and what's going on there. They're competing for viewership, especially with regards to TV. With regards to print media, newspapers are having a really hard time, so anything they can sensationalize, they will do, and make it seem more important. And having children with a disease at a camp and have an incident in the area is a great target. To give you a sense of this, I will tell you that during the fire that happened in our camp, up the road 2.5 miles, there is a 200-acre church camp, Seventh-day Adventist camp, that did need to be evacuated within an hour of the fire. They had 250 people there and lost 4 buildings. You could not find them on the media because we were a better story. They took pictures of their burnt down buildings in association with cancer camp was evacuated. So you just need to be kind of aware. It's best ahead of time to have a plan with regards to responding to media that you can guide staff and board, because if anybody has their name associated with their organization, they may get a call. Past board members, keyboard members, staff members at home. You'd be surprised the resources. I was getting emails. And of course, with social media, it was going all over the place with responses coming over Facebook and Twitter asking us what was going on. I really suggest that you ought to involve a media plan that's create assistance with legal counsel and with media specialists and define roles. For instance, at our camp, that any public statement will not happen here on the site, but it's happened by a designated person. We have 3 people that will be off-site because they then can handle that, and it doesn't get in the way of us dealing with the issue that's here in camp. And that's a standing rule for us. And so you need to kind of figure out what those roles are and how that communication is going to go. The other part is that media will be very pushy. We've had media actually disguise themselves in fire gear, in police gear, to get on site and say we need to access the site, and find out that they're actually with the media and they have turnouts that look like, or they have uniforms that look like they're official but they're not. And they're just trying to get on. They're trying to get a scoop. And so having somebody control that, we have a maintenance guy, and that was his job, to stand at the gate and keep everybody out. And as much as he got pushed, as much as he got asked, but basically he had pre-printed cards that said, here's who you can talk to for a statement. Right now we're dealing with the safety and the health and the concern of all of our campers and our staff. Thanks for respecting that, and kept everybody out. And that helps manage. It also allowed us to be able to put the story before we wanted them to. Camps need to understand that it is a right of media to kind of understand that the situation, but you also have to take a look at your brand, your reputation, and how to tell that you are taking care of safety. These are the kind of, we do have an emergency response plan in place. We will inform you more when more becomes available, so they don't feel like you're hiding something. But all of that needs to be managed, and so it's something to think about. As I said, pre-designation of spokespeople. Have bios of your spokespeople, because they'll want to know who they are, what authority they have. Prepared bios of your key staff, because they'll want to know, do you have a doctor on site? Well, who is it? Who are they related to? By the way, you also need to communicate that if you're working with a key facility or facilities, a hospital, they will get bombarded by calls, so they need to become a media partner with you. Have pre-prepared history of key messages, those things that you might want to share depending on the situation. A contact of information of people to approve statements, because you'll need to make some statements on the fly, and who are resources that could actually say, yeah, that makes great sense, or you ought to think about it this way. It's hard when you're managing a situation sometimes to see real clearly. At least it is for me. And so having these people out there that can help to refer that is really helpful. And then systems to refer inquiries to spokespeople. How do they get out there, and how do they tell people who they should talk to, and that we respect that they need to know. Last is responsibility of on-site, who secures the site from media or even parents coming up or all that, but allows the people that need to come in, and the people that don't. Who manages the safety of the campers and staff? Who's handling calls from parents, especially if it gets public? And we made sure that parents knew stuff before before press did, but we had to really keep on top of that. Logging incoming calls. Who's calling? Who needs information from the media? How do we get back to them? If it's a parent that we've already gotten a hold of but has situations that that need to be addressed because they're really concerned, and who's going to take care of that? Who are the people that are going to help you with that, and to contact those people? Parents are great to be able to be helpful if you can screen them ahead of time. You have a relationship with them. They can be a part of this team. Camp board people can. Risk management people can. It's also really important. We found that websites, social media, that we timed it very carefully when we put those statements up. And it went up on our website homepage. It went out through Facebook. It went out through Twitter. It went out through all those things to let them know. We did not use text messages and those kind of things because we wanted to kind of control it a little bit better. But we did make things that then could be responded and sent out to others. And I think that helped kind of control the message for us. I did, and it's on the paperwork, but one of the things that we train our staff very, very, very carefully with is if there is an inquiry from media or someone they don't know, basically how to respond courteously but also say they have no information. Sorry, I don't know anything. I'm not authorized to speak. I'm part of the camp, but I'd be happy to take a message and have somebody get back to you. Do you have a deadline? Who should we talk to? Those kind of things, because then they know that you're at least playing with them. You're working with them, rather than just trying to dodge them. And then sometimes they'll give you a little bit of breathing room. Some media do's and media don'ts I just put down here from our media folks. To know the story, what you're going to talk about ahead of time, use statistics, talk in sound bites, anticipate what questions they might ask so you have an answer, humanize the story, because it really is about the safety of our kids. They'll try to take a look at, how could you be in this situation? Why didn't you do something earlier? And it always comes back to, the safety of our staff and our campers is predominant. And we're making the decisions along with authorities, and how to do that. Don'ts, never say no comment. Avoid camp jargon. In camp, we kind of have this culture where we know what certain things mean, whether or not if it's what we call our healthcare center, we call it a med shed. People in the world don't know that. What you maybe call the camp doc, if the cook is the cookie, know that a lot of the rest of the world doesn't know those and try to avoid some of that. Also know that you're never off the record. Even though media say, well, you can tell me off the record. No, that doesn't exist. And so these are some of the pieces that just were given to us as examples. Lastly, with regards to crisis response and media, I put together for this presentation just some links, and once again, if you download it, you can get those links. A lot of this comes from the American Camp Association. I think they do a good job in taking a look at what to think about when creating these kinds of crisis plans, and also in dealing with the media. Also, feel free to get a hold of me, except I just realized the phone number down there is not a phone number. That's so weird. I just realized that. The email does work, so you can get a hold of me by email. I'll be more than happy to assist you where you can or ask. I'm really good at asking good questions with regards to these kinds of things. So that's what I had kind of put together. We talked about where those resources are. I guess I see by the time that we probably have maybe about another 10 minutes or 15 minutes, however people want to see if there's any questions out there that I can answer, or any any valuable experiences that you guys have that could, once again should be considered while we are all always updating our plans.
Well, Brian, you mentioned rental facilities, and a lot of people do rent their facilities.
Mm-hmm.
There are certain things pertinent to that, such as giving that facility a request for what you require should an emergency occur, whether it's potable water per person or access to certain phone lines, etc.
Yeah, I think it's really important outside of the typical things of contracts, certificates of insurance, with regards to figuring out how many cabins you're going to put kids in and what the activities are, is to really carve out some time with whoever your program's response team is with their response team and with their plan, because really it's going to be integrating their resource for you. And so, and also, yeah, you might have things that are very particular to your program that you want to make sure and to let them know, here's where we're going to need your help and here's how we want you to respond. Because I'll be honest with you, it's going to be the cook or it's going to be the site facility guys that's going to have a media inquiry before you do. It's going to be that, so you want them on your team without a doubt. And also with regards to what resources, I will say bus resources. We bus everyone. We don't have cars at camp. What your emergency resources have, what the camp may have, what you need to have, all those kinds of things are things to be talked about ahead of time, for sure. I saw another one. How much of the emergency or disaster plan do you recommend sharing with the children? I think that's a good question. I think that's a good conversation to have. I know that for us, we share with them what they need to know. If you hear this siren, here's where you're to go. If you hear this announcement, this is what you are to do. If you see a fire outside or inside a camp, here's who you should tell. If you see somebody on camp that you don't know, here's who you should go tell. So it's very much kind of on a on a relevant basis for them so that they can feel comfortable being there and feel like they have those resources. But with regards to the nits and grits and what might happen, that's for us, my feeling is that that is something for us to orchestrate for them and to bring them along in a confident way. But definitely if there's somebody on camp they don't know, if they see smoke rising or a fire, if they see, if there's an earthquake, what they should do, all those kind of things we share with them. If there's a thunderstorm, we share with them what to do, just so that they can know. And we don't belabor it, but we just kind of do a stand-up presentation at one of our assemblies. It says here, you mentioned an assembly emergency drill. Potentially, you could be required to do 3 or more drills. I assume that you do that all on the first day. Yeah, we do kind of emergency. It's the emergency drill, and it actually happens right before our assembly, before we go into the first lunch. So they have to get together anyway. It's not for a special reason. We have them all stand up. It's not a sit-down talk because we want it to go quick. But what we actually do is we sound a drill, and we tell our staff members, hey, pretend it's real. Let them know, hey, this is an emergency drill sound. This is what we're supposed to do. They all gather together. We account for everybody just like we would in a drill, so it actually helps our staff practice. The kids see what they should do. And then what that done, then we explain it. And we explain the other things that we want them to know. Here's a couple other things for everybody's safety in our community. We need your help. If you see somebody you don't know. If there's lightning or thunder, we're going to tell you exactly what to do. And if there is an earthquake, here's what you should do. And if you hear this, this is what we want you to do. Any questions? And so literally I want to say it's 10 minutes, 12 minutes, that's it. And then we go on with the week.
Any other questions for Brian? Okay, well, I want to thank Brian for doing this for us. Just in case you were not at the conference last year in Greenville, this was one of the sessions that was done, and we hope to feature a couple more topics in the next several months prior to this year's conference, because this is the kind of content that we try to have there. I'm going to send out right now a link to not only the website, but also to John Golden, our operations manager. If you have feedback or need more information, you can access those links and send it to us. My apologies, a couple of the audio glitches there in the middle. We're ready. Here we go.
What did you say?
And I would just say that, yeah, my email's down there. Please feel comfortable just to jot that down while it's still on the screen. And I can send stuff to you. But I really appreciate COCA having a resource area just for these, because I know even some of our medical plans are up there and all those kinds of things as resources. I think the more we all do to share that, it helps us all run better programs and be better prepared to do great work for our kids. So thanks to COCA for creating that resource.
Well, thank you, Brian. Everyone have a good day.
Thanks, gang. Take care.